The world can be a strange or frightening place, and it's often common to think everyone is against me. But what if the truth is even stranger than that? They, by Robert Heinlin. Read by Karl. They would not let him alone. They never would let him alone. He realized that was part of the plot against him. Never to leave him in peace. Never to give him a chance to mull over the lies they had told him. Time enough to pick out the flaws and to figure out the truth for himself. That damned attendant this morning. He'd come bustling in with his breakfast tray, waking him and causing him to forget his dream. If I could remember that dream. Someone was unlocking the door. He ignored it. Howdy, old boy. You tell me you refused your breakfast? Dr. Hayward's professionally kindly mask hung over his bed. I wasn't hungry. But we can't have that. You get weak and I won't be able to get you well completely. Now get up and get your clothes on and I'll order an eggnog for you. Come on, that's a good fellow. Unwilling, but still wanting him to enter into any contest of wills, he got out of bed and slipped in his bathrobe. That's better, Hayward approved. Have a cigarette? No, thank you. The doctor shook his head in a puzzled fashion. Darn if I can figure out. Loss of interest in physical pleasure does not fit your type of case. What is my type of case? He inquired in flat tones. Tut, tut. Hayward tried to appear roguish. If medicos told their professional secrets, they would have to work for a living. What is my type of case? Well, label doesn't matter, does it? Suppose you tell me. I really know nothing about your cases yet. Don't you think it's about time we talked? I'll play chess with you. All right, all right. Hayward made a gesture of impatient concession. We played chess every day for a week. If you'll talk, I'll play chess. What could it matter? If he was right, they already understood perfectly he discovered their plot. There was nothing to gain by concealing the obvious. Let him try to argue him out of it. Let the tail go with the hide. To hell with it. He got the chessmen and commenced setting them up. What do you know of my case so far? Very little. Physical examination? Negative. Past history? Negative. High intelligence, as shown by the record in school and your success in your profession. Occasional fits and moodiness, but nothing exceptional. The only possible information was the incident that caused you to come here for treatment. To be brought here, you mean? Why should it cause comment? Well, good gracious, man. If you barricade yourself in a room and your sister or wife was pointing against you, don't you expect people to notice? But she was pointing against me, and so are you. White or black? Black. It's your turn to attack. Why do you think we're pointing against you? It's an evolved story and goes way back into my early childhood. There was an intermediate incident, however. He opened by advancing the White King's knights to KB3. Hayward's eyes raised. You made a piano attack? Why not? You know it's not safe for me to risk a gambit with you. The doctor shrugged his shoulders and answered the opening. Suppose we start with your early childhood. It may shed more light than more recent incidents. Did you feel that you were persecuted as a child? No. Half rose from his chair. When I was a child, I was sure of myself. I knew then, I tell you, I knew. Life was worthwhile, and I knew it. I was at peace with myself and our surroundings. Life was good, and I was good, and the creatures around me were like myself. And weren't they? Not at all. Particularly the children. Didn't know what viciousness was until I was turned loose with other children. The little devils. I expected to be like them and play with them. The doctor nodded. I know. The herd compulsion. Children can be pretty savage at times. You missed the point. This wasn't any healthy roughness. These creatures were different, not like myself at all. They looked on me and they were not like me. If I tried to say anything to anyone, anything that mattered to me, all I get was a stare and a scornful laugh. Then they find some way to punish me for having said it. Hayward nodded. See what you mean. How about grown-ups? That is somewhat different. Adults don't matter to children at first. Rather, they didn't matter to me. They were too big, and they didn't bother me. They were busy with things that didn't enter into my considerations. It was only when I noticed that my presence affected them, I began to wonder about them. How do you mean? Well, they never did things that when I was around that they did when I was not around. Hayward looked at him carefully. Wouldn't that statement take quite a lot of justifying? How do you know what they did when you weren't around? He acknowledged the point. But he used to catch them just stopping. If I came to a room, the conversation would stop suddenly. It would pick up the weather or something equally inane. Then I took to hiding and listening and looking. Adults do not behave the same way in my presence as out of it. Your move, I believe. But see here, old man, that was when you were a child. Every child passes through that phase. Now you're a man, you must see the adult point of view. Children are strange creatures and have to be protected. At least we do protect them from many adult interests. There's a whole code of conventions on the matter that... Yes, he interrupted impatiently. I know all that. Nevertheless, I noticed enough, remembered enough that would never occur to me later. And it put me on my guard to notice the next thing. Which was? He noticed the doctor's eyes were averted as he adjusted the castle's position. The things I saw people doing and hear them talking about were never of any importance. They must be doing something else. I don't follow you. You don't choose to follow me. I'm telling you this to you in exchange for a game of chess. Why do you like to play chess so well? Because it's the only thing in the world where I can see all the factors and understand all the rules. Never mind. It's all around me, this enormous planet. Cities, farms, factories, churches, schools, homes, railroads. People that looked like me and who should have felt very much like me if what I told you was the truth. But what did they appear to be doing? They went to work to earn the money to buy the food, to get the strength to go to work. To earn the money to buy the food, to get the strength to go to work. And so they fell over dead. Any slight variation in the basic pattern did not matter, for they always fell over dead. Everybody tried to tell me I should be doing the same thing. I knew better. The doctor gave a look, apparently intended to denote helpless surrender, and laughed. I can't argue with you. Life does look like that. Maybe it is just that futile. But it's the only life we have. Why not just make up your mind to enjoy it as much as possible? Oh no. Look both sulky and stubborn. You can't pile nonsense to me by claiming to be fresh out of sense. How do I know? Because of all of this complex stage setting, all these forms of actors cannot be put together just to make idiot noises at each other. Some other explanation, but not that one. As insanity is enormous, as complex as the one around me had to be planned. I found the plan. Which is? He noticed the doctor's eyes again averted. It's a play intended to divert me, to occupy my mind and confuse me. Keep me so busy with details I might not have time to think about the meaning. You're all in it, every one of you. He shook his finger at the doctor's face. Most of them may be helpless automatons, but you're not. You're one of the conspirators. You've been sitting as a troubleshooter, trying to force me to go back to playing the role assigned to me. He saw the doctor was waiting for him to quiet down. Take it easy, Hayward finally managed to say. Maybe it is all a conspiracy. Why do you think you've been singled out for special attention? Maybe it's a joke on all of us. Why couldn't I be one of the victims as well? Got you, he pointed a long finger at Hayward. That is the essence of the plot. All the creatures have been set up to look like me in order to prevent me from realizing I was the center of the arrangement. But I've noticed the key fact, the mathematically inescapable fact that I'm unique. Here am I sitting on the inside. The world extends outward from me. I am the center. Easy, man, easy. Don't you realize the world looks that way to me, too? We're the center of the universe. Not so. That's what you've tried to make me believe. I'm just one of millions more just like me. Wrong. They were like me, I could get into communication with them. I can't. I have tried and I can't. I've sent out my inner thoughts, seeking some other being who has them too. What have I gotten back? Wrong answers, jarring incongruities, meaningless obscurity. I've tried, I tell you. God, how I've tried. There's nothing out there to speak to me. Nothing but emptiness and otherness. Wait a minute. You mean to say you think there's nobody home with my end of the line? Don't you believe I am alive and conscious? He regarded the doctor soberly. Yes, I think you're probably alive, but you're one of the others, my antagonists. But you have set thousands of others around me whose faces are blank, not lived in, and whose speech is a meaningless reflex of noise. Well then, if you can see that I'm ego, why do you insist that I'm so different from yourself? Why? Wait. He pushed back from the chess table and strode over to the wardrobe, which he took out a violin case. He was playing, the lines of suffering smoothed out at his face, and his expression took a relaxed beatitude. For a while he recaptured the emotions, but not the knowledge, which he possessed in dreams. The melody proceeded easily from proposition to proposition with inescapable and unforced logic. He finished with a triumphant statement of the essential thesis and turned to the doctor. Well? He seemed to take an even greater degree of caution in the doctor's manner. It's an odd bit, but remarkable. It's a pity you didn't take up the violin seriously. You could have made quite a reputation. You could even begin now. Why don't you do it? You could afford to, I believe. He stood and stared at the doctor for a long moment and shook his head a bit, trying to clear it. It's No use, he said slowly. No use at all. There's no possibility of communication. I'm alone. Replace the instruments in his case and return to the chase table. My move, I believe? Yes. Guard your queen. He studied the board. Not necessary. I no longer need my queen. Check. The doctor interposed a pawn to parry the attack. He nodded. Use your pawn as well, but I have warned to anticipate your play. Check again. And mate, I think. The doctor examined the situation. No, he decided. No, not quite. Retreated from the square under attack. Not checkmate, stalemate at the worst. Yes, another stalemate. He was upset by the doctor's visit. He couldn't be wrong, basically, because the doctor had pointed out logical holes in his position. From a logical standpoint, the whole world might be a fraud perpetrated on everybody. But logic meant nothing. Logic itself was a fraud, starting with unproved assumptions to keep proving anything. The world is what it is. It carries its own evidence of trickery. But does it? What do you have to go on? Could you lay down a line between known facts and everything else and then make a reasonable interpretation of the world based on facts alone? An interpretation free from complexities of logic, no hidden assumptions of point not certain? Very well. First fact, himself. He knew himself directly. He existed. Second facts, the evidence of his five senses. Everything he himself saw and heard and smelled and tasted with his physical senses. Selection and limitations, he must believe his senses. Without them, he was entirely solitary, shut up in a locker of bone, blind, deaf, cut off, the only being in the world. And that was not the case. He knew he did not invent the information brought to him by his senses. There had to be something else out there, some otherness to produce the thing his senses recorded. All philosophies that claim the physical realm did not exist and symphony of his imagination were sheer nonsense. But beyond that, what? Were there any third facts on which he could rely? No, not at this point. He could not afford to believe anything he was told or he read, or that was implicitly assumed to be true about the world around him. No, he could not believe any of it, for the sum total of what he had been told and read and been taught in school was so contradictory, so senseless, so widely insane that none of it could be believed unless he personally confirmed it. Wait a minute. The very telling of his lies, these senseless contradictions, was a fact in itself, known to him directly. To that extent, they were data, probably very important data. The world that had been shown to him was a piece of unreason, an idiot's dream. Yet it was on too malice a scale to be without some reason. He came wearily back to his original point. Since the world cannot be as crazy as it appeared to be, it must necessarily have been arranged to appear crazy in order to deceive him as to the truth. Why had they done it to him? What was the truth behind the sham? Must be some clue in deception itself. What thread ran through it all? Well, in the first place, he had been given a superabundance of explanations of the world around him. Philosophies, religions, common sense explanations. Most of them were so clumsy, so obviously inadequate or meaningless, they could hardly have expected him to take them seriously. Must have intended them simply as misdirection. But there were certain basic assumptions running through all the hundreds of explanations of the craziness around him. It must be these basic assumptions he was expected to believe. For example, there was a deep-seated assumption that he was a human being, essentially like millions of us around him and billions more in the past and future. That was nonsense. He never once managed to get into real communication with all those things that looked so much like him or were so different. In the agony of his loneliness, he deceived himself that Alice understood him and was a being like him. He knew now that he had suppressed and refused to examine thousands of little discrepancies because he did not bear the thought of returning to complete loneliness. He needed to believe that his wife was a living, breathing being of his own kind who understood his inner thoughts. He refused to consider the possibility that she was simply a mirror, an echo, or something unthinkably worse. He'd found a mate, and the world was tolerable, even though dull, stupid, and full of petty annoyance. He was moderately happy and put away his suspicions. He'd accepted, quite docilely, the treadmill he was expected to use, till a slight mischance had momentarily cut through the fraud. The suspicions had returned with impounded force. The bitter knowledge of his childhood had been confirmed. He supposed he'd been a fool to make a fuss about it. If he kept his mouth shut, they would not have locked him up. She'd have been as subtle and shrewd as they, kept his eyes and ears open and learned details out on the reason for the plot against him. He might have learned how to circumvent it. What if they had locked him up? The whole world's an asylum, and all of them his keepers. The key scraped on the lock, and looked up to see an attendant entering with a tray. "Here's your dinner, sir." "Thanks, Joe. Just put it down." "Movies tonight, sir." the attendant went on. Wouldn't you like to go? Dr. Hayward said you could. No, thank you. I prefer not to. Wish you would, sir. Notice with amusement the persuasive intentness of the attendant's manner. I think the doctor wants you to. It's a good movie. There's a Mickey Mouse cartoon. You must persuade me, Joe, he answered with passive agreeableness. Biggest trouble's the same as mine, essentially. However, I'm not going. Need not bother to hold movies tonight. Well, there'll be movies in any case, sir. Lots of our other guests will attend. Really? Is that an example of thoroughness? You're simply keeping up the pretense of talking to me. Isn't necessary, Joe, if it's any strain on you. I know the game. If I don't attend, there's no point in holding movies. I liked the grin with which the attendant answered his thrust. Was it possible this being created just as he appeared to be? Big muscles, phlegmatic disposition, tolerant, dog-white. Was there nothing going on behind those kind eyes, nothing but robot reflex? No, it was more likely he was one of them, since he was so closely in attendance on him. The attendant left, and he busied himself with the supper tray, scooping up the already cut bits of meat with a spoon, the only implement provided. He smiled again at their caution and thoroughness. No danger of that. He would not destroy this body as long as it served him in investigating the truth of the matter. There were still many different avenues of research available for taking that possibly irrevocable step. After supper, he decided to put his thoughts in better order by writing them down. Obtained paper. He'd start with a general statement of some underlying postulate of the credos that had jumped into his whole life. Life? Yeah, that was a good one. He wrote, I am told I was born a certain number of years ago, and I will die a similar number of years hence. Various clumsy stories have been offered to me to explain where I was before birth and what becomes to me after death, but they're rough lies, none intended to deceive, except as misdirection. There are very possible way the world around me assumes I am mortal, here about a few years, and a few years hence gone completely, non-existence. Wrong. I am immortal. I transcend this little time exodus. A 70-year spin on it is but a casual phase of my existence. Second only to the prime date of my own existence, it is emotionally convincing certainty of my own continuity. I may be a closed curve, but, closed or open, I have neither a beginning nor an end. Self-awareness is not rational. It is absolute, can be reached to be destroyed or created. Memory, however, being a rational aspect of consciousness, may be tampered with and possibly destroyed. True that most religions have offered me teach immortality, but note the fashion in which they teach it. Sure way to lie convincingly is to tell the truth unconvincingly. They do not wish me to believe. Caution. Why have they tried so hard to convince me I was going to die in a few years? It must be a very important reason. I am afraid of hurrying by some sort of major change. It may be crucially important for me to figure out their intentions about this. Notably, I have several years in which to reach a decision. Note, avoid using the type of reasoning they have taught me. The attendant was back. Your wife is here, sir. Tell her to go away. Please, sir. Dr. Hayward is most anxious that you should see her. Tell Dr. Hayward I said he is an excellent chess player. Yes, sir. The attendant waited a moment. Then you won't see her, sir? No, I won't see her. I went in the room for some minutes after the attendant had left, too distraught to return to his recapitulation. By and large, they had played very decent with him since they brought him here. He was glad they allowed him to have a room alone. It certainly meant more time for contemplation than ever been possible on the outside. To be sure, a continuous effort to keep him busy and distracting was being made, but being stubborn, he was able to circumvent the rules and gave him some hours each day for introspection. But damnation, he did wish he had not persisted in using Alice in attempts to divert his thoughts. Though the intense terror and revulsion which he inspired him when he first discovered the truth had now aged into a simple feeling of repugnance and distaste for her company, nevertheless it was emotionally upsetting to be forced into remembering her, be forced into making decisions about her. After all, she'd been his wife for many years. Wife? What was a wife? Little soul like one's own, a compliment, the unnecessary pulse of the couple, sanctuary of understanding and sympathy in the boundless depths of aloneness. That's what he had thought. What he needed to believe and to believe fiercely he fears. The yearning need of companionship of his own kind had caused him to see himself reflected in those beautiful eyes, and it made him quite uncritical of occasional incongruities in her responses. He sighed. He felt he had sloughed off most of the type emotional reactions which they had taught him by precept and example, but Alice had gotten under his skin, way under, and it still hurt. He had been happy. What if it had been a dope dream? They gave her an excellent and beautiful mirror to play with. The more fool he to have looked behind it. Wearily, he turned back to his summing up. The world is explained in either one of two ways. Common way which says that the world is pretty much as it appears to be, ordinary human contact and motivations are reasonable, and the religio-mystic solution which states the world is dream stuff, unreal, insubstantial reality somewhere behind. Wrong, both of them. The common sense scheme has no sense of any sort. Life is short and full of trouble. Man born of woman is born to trouble as the sparks fly upward. His days are few and they are numbered. All is vanity and vexation. This quotation may be jumbled and incorrect, but that's a fair statement of the common sense world as it seems, and its only possible evaluation. In such a world, human striving is about as rational as the blind dartings of a moth against a light bulb. The common sense world is a blind insanity, out of nowhere, going nowhere to no purpose. As for the other solution, it appears more rational on the surface, and then it rejects the utterly irrational world of common sense. But it's not a rational solution, and it's simply a flight from reality of any sort, for it refuses to believe the results of the only available direct communication between the ego and the outside. Clearly the five senses are poor enough channels to communication, but they're the only ones. He crumbled out the paper and flung himself on the chair. Order and logic were no good. His answer was right because it smelled right. But he still did not know all the answer. Why the grand scales of deception? Countless creatures, whole continents, enormously involved in minutely detailed matrix of insane history, insane tradition, insane culture. Why bother with more than a cell and a straitjacket? It must be, it had to be, because it was supremely important to deceive him completely, because the latest deception could not do. Could it be they did not dare let him suspect his real identity, no matter how difficult it involved the fraud? He had to know. In some fashion he must get behind the deception and see what went on when he was not looking. He had had one glimpse. This time he must see the actual workings, catch the puppet masters in their manipulations. Obviously the first step must be to escape from the asylum, but to do it so craftily they would not see him, never catch up with him, nor have a chance to set the stage before him. That would be hard to do. He must excel them in shrewdness and subtlety. Once decided, he spent the rest of the evening considering the means by which he might accomplish his purpose. It seemed almost impossible. He must get away without once having seen and remain in strict hiding. He must lose track of him completely in order they would not know where to sense their deceptions. That would mean going without food for several days. Very well, he could do it. He must not give any warning by unusual action or manner. The light blinked twice. Docilely he got up and commenced preparation for bed. When the tenant looked at the peephole, he was already in bed when his face turned to the wall. Gladness everywhere. It's good to be with his own kind, to hear the music swelling out of every living thing, as it always had and always would. Good to know everything was living and aware of him, particularly in him as he participated in them. It was good to know the unity of many and the diversity of one. There had been one bad thought, the details escaped him, but it was gone, as if it had never been. There was no place for it. The early morning sounds from the adjacent wards penetrated the sleep-laden body which served him here, and gradually recalled his awareness of the hospital room. Transition was so gentle, he carried over full recollection of what he had been doing and why. He lay still, a gentle smile on his face, and savored the uncouth but not unpleasant languor of the body he wore. Strange, he had never forgotten, despite their tricks and stratagems. When now he recalled the key, he would set things right in their odd place, called them at once and announced a new order. It would be amusing to see old Garoon's expression when he realized the cycle had ended. The click of the peephole and the rasp of the door being unlocked guillotined his line of thought. The morning attendant pushed briskly in the breakfast tray and placed on the big table. "Morning, sir. Nice bright day. Morning in bed, or will you get up?" "Don't answer. Don't listen. Suppress this distraction. That's part of their plan." But it was too late. Too late. He felt himself slipping, falling, wrenched from reality back into the fragile world in which they kept him. It was gone. Gone completely, with no single assumption around him to anchor memory. Nothing left but the sense of heartbreaking loss and the acute ache of unsatisfied catharsis. "Leave it where it is. I'll take care of it." "Okie doke." The attendant bustled out, slamming the door and noisily locked it. He was quiet for a long time, every nerve in his body screaming for relief. Last he got out of bed, still miserably unhappy, and attempted to concentrate on his plans for escape. But the psychic wrench he received in being recalled so suddenly from his plane of reality had left him bruised and emotionally disturbed. His mind insisted on reassuring its doubts rather than engage in constructive thought. Was it possible the doctor was right? He was not alone in this miserable dilemma. Would he simply suffer from illusions of self-importance, paranoia? Could it be that each unit of this DC stream around him was the prison of another lonely ego, helpless, blind, and speechless, condemned to an eternity of miserable loneliness? Was the look of suffering which he had brought to Alice's face a true recollection of inner torment, and not simply a piece of play acting intended to maneuver them in compliance with their plans? A knock sounded at the door. He said, "Come in," without looking up. The comings and noise did not matter to him. "Dearest," a well-enough voice spoke slowly and hesitantly. Alice was on her feet at once and facing her. "Who put you in here?" "Please, dear, please, I had to see you." "It isn't fair, it isn't fair." He spoke with himself into her. Then, "Why'd you come?" Stood off to him with a dignity he had hardly expected. The beauty of her childlike face had been marred by line and shadow, but it shone with an unexpected currents. "I love you," she answered quietly. "You could tell me to go away, but you can't make me stop loving you and trying to help you." He turned away from her in agony of indecision. Could it be possible he had misjudged her? Was there, behind that barrier of flesh and sound symbols, a spirit that surely leaned towards his? Lovers whispering in the dark. "Do you understand, don't you?" "Yes, dear heart, I understand. Nothing can happen to us can matter, as long as we are together and understand." Words, rebounding hollowly from an unbroken wall. No, he couldn't be wrong. Test her again. "Why'd you keep me on that job in Omaha?" "I didn't make you keep the job. So we point out we should think twice before—" Never mind. Soft hands and a sweet face preventing from mild stubbornness from ever doing the thing his heart had told him to. Always the best of intentions. But always so he had never managed to do the silly, unreasonable things he knew were worthwhile. Hurry, and strive, with an evil-faced jockey to see you don't stop long enough to think for yourself. "Why did you try to stop me from going upstairs that day?" She managed to smile, although her eyes were already spilling over tears. "Didn't know it really mattered to you. I didn't want us to miss the train." It had been a small thing, an unimportant thing. For some reason that occurred to him, he insisted on going back upstairs to his study when they were about to leave the house for a short vacation. It was raining. She pointed out they had barely enough time to get to the station. He surprised himself, and her too, by insisting in his own way, in circumstances in which he had never been known to be stubborn. It actually pushed her to one side and forced his way up the stairs. Even then, nothing might have come of it had he not, quite unnecessarily, raised the shade of the window that faced towards the rear of the house. It was a very small matter. It had been raining hard out in front. From this window the weather was clear and sunny, but no sign of rain. He stood there for quite a long while, gazing out at the possible sunshine and rearranging cosmos in his mind. He re-examined long-suppressed doubts in the light of his one small but totally unexplainable discrepancy. Then he turned and found she was standing behind him. He'd been trying ever to forget the expression of surprise in her face. "What about the rain?" "The rain?" She repeated in a small, puzzled voice. "Why, it was raining, of course. What about it?" "It was not raining out my study window." "What? But of course it was. Didn't the sun break through the clouds for a moment, but that was all." "Nonsense." "But, darling, what's the weather to do with you and me?" "What difference does it make whether it rains or not, to us?" She approached him timidly and instilled a small hand between his arm and side. "Am I responsible for the weather?" "I think you are. Now please go." She withdrew from him, blushed blindly at her eyes, gulped once, and said in a voice held steady, "All right, I'll go. But remember, you can come home if you want to, and I'll be there if you want me." She waited a moment, then added hesitantly, Would you kiss me goodbye?" He made no answer of any sort, neither with voice nor eyes. She looked at him and turned, fumbling blindly for the door and rushed to it. The creature he knew was Alice went to the place of assembly without stopping to change form. It is necessary to adjourn this sequence. I am no longer able to influence his decisions. They had expected it, nevertheless disturbed with dismay. The Garoon dressed the first for manipulation, prepared to graft the selected memory track at once. Then turning to the first for operations, he said, "The extrapolation shows he will tend to escape within 2 of his days. The sequence degenerated primarily through your failure to extend that rainfall all around him. Be advised." It would be simple if you understood his motives. In my capacity as Dr. Hayward, I have often thought so, commented the Garoon acidly. But if we understand his motives, we are part of him. Bear in mind the treaty. He almost remembered. The creature known as Alice spoke up. Could he not have the Taj Mahal-like sequence? For some reason, he values it. You are becoming assimilated. Perhaps. I am not in fear. Will he receive it? It will be considered. The Garoon continued with orders. We have structures standing until adjournment. New York City and Harvard University are now dismantled. Divert him from those sectors. Move. The end.